And now, to revive one of my favorite mini segments in all of No Script Theater history. Hello and welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob, I am here with Jackson, and today we are continuing in our themed month. We are talking about adaptations, scripts, plays that are built from other material. We've talked about a group of great adaptations so far. We are off to the races today with another one based on a title you probably recognize, even if you've maybe not read it, of a very kind of a cult classic musical, kind of a shocking, great for fall, horror, psychological, brutality kind of deep thing, but like with song and dance and like high schoolers jumping all around and going to prom. All that kind of stuff wrapped up today in the musical adaptation of Carrie, the Stephen King novel Carrie by Michael Gore, adaptation by Michael Gore, Dean Pitchford, and Lawrence D. Cohen.
Yes, excited for the conversation today and to tie it into our broader conversation around Adaptation Month. This play, musical based on, the first book by Stephen King. So a pretty well known, at least certainly in retrospect, this plot has gotten quite a bit of attention. So excited to kind of chat about the ways that this story has evolved across its mediums into the musical that we're talking about today.
Yeah, and this is truly like a story adaptation. We've talked so far in our month. This is our third episode of Adaptation Month, and we've looked at a script that is not so much an adaptation of the plot, but more of a new way of grappling with similar ideas in John Proctor as the villain. And then we talked about like very much a story adaptation in Pride and Prejudice. The characters you recognize, the situations you recognize, and we talked about Kate Hamill's unique kind of adaptation strategy, which is to try to give us a similar experience to the original audience. And that is going to involve some changes, but by and large, she's trying to do something really, I think, honoring of what the novel is supposed to be, even while it really pisses off a group of people who do not like it because it is not very nostalgic in the way that they remember reading the novel. Today's adaptation of Carrie is very much like an adaptation of the story of the novel of Carrie, but it's also a musical, and musicals have pretty unique and particular storytelling structure. And musicals are a very common place to do adaptations for reasons that we'll probably end up talking about today. But Carrie it's a cult classic for its, its content. It's like the bucket of blood and the bullying high schoolers kind of thing. And it really is, even since the first version of this musical came out, the like mean high school musical genre has really exploded. So it's a cult classic for that. It's also a cult classic for some of just the stories about the production. It was kind of the original technical things gone wrong before, like now we talk about Spider-Man. So it's got some fun sort of stuff wrapped up into it that make it a blast. But also, definitely we wanted to include a musical in here because musicals are really maybe even the kind of champion of adaptation work in contemporary American drama.
Yeah, it's a great sort of way to have it's sort of baked in that it's a fresh experience of the plot. If you're going from a non-musical plot, like just a prose plot, to the musical, you're going to have a fresh experience. It's going to be new. You might be engaging the same plot points, but you're going to have a new response as a result of it. So yeah.
Because, spoiler alert, the novel Carrie does not contain songs.
Right. Yep.
When the characters have to grapple with something, they don't step down stage and have a spotlight hit them and sing their inner monologue. But I think that's like a really interesting point, that by virtue of adapting something into a musical, you are changing or adding or whatever verb you want to use. You're doing something different. You're going to experience it in a new way because the music is just a fundamentally new element.
Yeah, yep. It's different to engage with. Your body interacts with the play in a different way because of the music, so you're having a fundamentally different experience. Excited to jump into the conversation today. Before we do, though, wanted to say thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast for being patrons of the show. Thank you for being awesome. Thank you for making things like themed month happen. Thank you for making all the like hallmarks of the season, right? The wide variety of scripts, the special guest episodes, the themed months, and all that. The patrons make it possible. So thank you all so much for being a part of making No Script happen. If you're looking for a way to get involved in the show or just help out the show, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, whether you're a recent addition to the community as a result of this themed month, or a longtime listener looking for another way to get involved, Patreon's a great way to do that. Number of different tiers over there. Lowest one is just $1, $12 over the course of a year, and you get access to all sorts of things like patron-only posts and advance notice of like scripts that we do in themed months, so that's kind of cool as well. So if you're looking for a way to help out the show and get involved in a new way, head on over to patreon.com/noscriptpodcast, and we will see you over there.
And now back to the script.
Here we go.
Listen, musicals are tough because, especially commercial musicals that are adaptations, because they almost always have like a fairly sizable group of collaborators. Often you'll at least see a composer and a book lyricist. And for a show like this, there's even more. And none of these three people have we talked about. I'm not going to be able to do a full context section over all of them. That would just end up being the whole podcast. So here's just a brief touch on these three folks that collaborated in the creation of this script. Michael Gore is really known for fame, for the movie musical Fame. Won a couple of Oscars for it, for Best Original Song and Best Original Score. He was a longtime kind of collaborator, and really all three of these folks, this project and the story around this project is kind of one of the major notable things about their career. But Gore also collaborated both with Pitchford and with Cohen on different projects outside of this. And so that's what you're going to know Michael Gore for a lot, especially if you love Fame. You're probably well aware of that part of it. He was also the composer. He does a fair amount of film composing, it seems like. Composed the score for the movie Terms of Endearment. So if you're very fond of that movie, you can thank Michael Gore for the soundtrack. Dean Pitchford, who was supposedly the brain behind the lyrics for Carrie, is an actor, singer, but also identifies as a songwriter, a screenwriter, a director, a novelist. Probably has the most wide, robust career of these three folks. You're gonna, maybe if you saw some of the original productions of Godspell, like the off-Broadway stuff that was coming around, Pitchford was involved in those as an actor, also collaborated with Gore on Fame, and ended up being kind of a famous American songwriter, wrote a bunch of songs for people like Dolly Parton, for people like Merle Haggard, for people like Kenny Loggins. Most famous, though, for writing the screenplay and collaborating on the score for Footloose. So, I mean, that is Dean Pitchford's real claim to fame, besides a bunch of like individual songs for recording artists, is going to be the creation of Footloose. And then Lawrence D. Cohen is a screenwriter and producer. This project is Lawrence Cohen's brainchild, is sort of my sense of the story, because he wrote the screenplay for the 1976 movie of Carrie. So Carrie, the novel, which I'll talk about here in just a second, comes out in 74. In 75, it sells like 1 million copies and goes crazy, and so they make a movie that Cohen writes the screenplay for, and then worked on a couple of other screenplays of Stephen King adaptations, including the most famous TV miniseries adaptation of It, I think that the 1990 version, which has whatever your picture in your head is of Pennywise the Clown. It's probably connected to that 1990 TV miniseries. So Lawrence Cohen, I mean, seems to have done that clearly a couple of times, writing these drama adaptations of Stephen King, mostly screenplays, right? But stage play is similar to a screenplay in that they're both works of drama, but very different in other ways. And actually, the foreword to the libretto that we read has a couple of notes about the things that they were trying to do specifically theatrically that I think are interesting, especially coming from someone who's so decidedly a screenwriter. So the Stephen King novel, Carrie, right? Stephen King is a major American author, has written just a huge library of books that are, famous the world over. The Shining, Misery, It, things like that, right? And so this novel really begins Stephen King's enormous, it's hard to really understate what a massive influence Stephen King is on American literature, really. And there's a lot of English professors and teachers that are here to tell you that Stephen King is not literature. And I don't believe those people and don't listen to them at all. I definitely think he is. And regardless, certainly has influenced American literature. And it started here, right? And the story of Carrie is, I think, a famous one at this point, that he wrote a couple of pages as the sort of introduction to it and then ended up throwing them in the trash. And that his wife, Tabitha, finds that in the trash and continues to encourage him to finish the novel. And that starts, one of the great writing careers of all time. So it already has wrapped up in it this kind of famous story that is connected to, but is not the story of the novel. And that's going to continue on into the productions of this musical, which begin in 1988, where they do a tryout production at Stratford-upon-Avon, co-presented by the Royal Shakespeare Company. Then that production transfers to Broadway later that year at the Virginia Theater. Both of those two productions have huge technical issues, because one of the things that they try to do with the original production is make some of the, I guess, magic, is that what we're going to call it? Magic, supernatural elements. Yeah. The telekinesis that is really at the centerpiece of what is going on in Carrie. They try to achieve a lot of that with special effects. And those special effects apparently don't go very well. They don't really go very well in terms of their execution, and they don't go over very well because both those productions were just panned by critics. I mean, just absolutely torched. And again, Carrie was kind of the original thing that now we all say and think about the Spider-Man musical. It has a lot of the same things going on. There were a bunch of changes to the script made. It had just terrible reviews. There's some famous lines in there from Brantley and from Frank Rich that just absolutely torch it. But in part, I think because of the negative response and because of how much money was lost in trying to stage this kind of commercial production, in the intervening years between that 1988 Broadway trial, essentially, and the production that begins in 2012, which we'll talk about in just a second, it develops this kind of fascination, and there are all these unofficial productions of the musical. People find copies of the stuff and do it, not technically licensed, and it gains kind of a mystery and an intrigue around it. And out of that eventually comes, from these three gentlemen, the idea to remount it in 2012 off Broadway and do some significant rewrites to the script. I think one of the things they were trying to do is to make the execution of the musical more theatrical, less reliant on special effects, and also trying to sort of alter the heart of it a little bit. It ends up being a little bit kind of an anti-bullying message about kindness. Certainly Carrie, the novel, is about bullying in the sense that it's part of the story. My sense is that not that like Carrie, Stephen King's novel, is an anti-bullying piece in the way that the version of the musical that you can exist and do now kind of is. And so that was part of their thought, I think, was to try to make the actual approach of what the musical is trying to ask more, I guess, palatable in some way, might be a way to say it. But that off-Broadway revival at the Lucille Laurel Theater, it does go on to like spark, a fairly robust life for this musical. So it's going to play kind of all over for a while in Seattle in 2013, at the Studio Theater in DC in 2014, and then two really well-known productions, one off West End at the Southwark Playhouse, and then the 2015 La Mirada Theater production in LA kind of kick-started the musical's new following and popularity. And so what that looked like, they called it Carrie the Killer Musical Experience. And what they were doing was essentially an immersive production where the audience would come, and what they would walk into in the lobby in the theater was sort of a feeling of being at the prom that is the centerpiece scene of Carrie. And so that goes really well. Actually gets really popular, really great reviews. And again, sort of sparks new life for this project that seemed dead in 1988. So, here's a list of productions. It's obviously not all of them. You'll see that a lot of them are universities. Shows like this that have a cast of young characters often get done at universities because the roles are a little more approachable for college actors. So it has a huge university life, but also many great professional productions. 2017, Montclair State University. 22, Marymount, Manhattan. 23, the Cadence Theater in Virginia. The Frank Sinatra School of the Arts in New York. 24 at Wright State University. 24 to the American Conservatory Theater, Coastal Carolina University. And then listen to just this 2025 list of productions, just in the past year. We're not even all the way through. Queensland Academy of Excellence in Musical Theater in Melbourne, Pit and Balcony Theater in Michigan, Steamer No. 10 Theater in Albany, the Ellis Theater Guild in Pennsylvania, Christopher Newport University in Virginia, Barley Sheaf Players in Pennsylvania, just last month at the Theater Denton in Texas, and the Cal Rep Theater in Long Beach. And now, to revive one of my favorite mini segments in all of No Script Theater history, I have pulled up the Concord Theatricals website because I just want to roll through productions that are currently on the schedule for Carrie the Musical. And it's an extensive list. I won't get all the way through. 90 Miles Theater Company in New York. Also, there's Ghost Theater Company in Swindon. Belsima Productions in Buffalo, Bergen Musketeer in Ulset, Berkeley Playhouse in California, Bromley Musical Theater Company in Kent, Colahoche and Ankara, the Community Players in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, the Franklin Civic Operetta Association, the Lakewood Playhouse in Washington, the Lebanon Valley College in Annville, Pennsylvania, whatever LIPA is in Liverpool, Merseyside, North Texas Performing Arts in Fairview, Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Oceanside Theater Company in California, Old Academy Players in Philadelphia. So, and I mean, that is not the end of the list. It goes on and on. So Carrie, which started as this like absolute flop, like one of the great flops of all time. Earlier today, I just read an article which was about great flops ever and was titled, "Is Carrie the Worst Musical of All Time?" And it tracked just some of the biggest commercial losses and flops. And so it starts as that, right? And now it has like about as many productions as anything out there, right? I mean, like that, just thinking at the what productions were done this year and are scheduled for into the future, like Carrie the Musical suddenly everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, kind of a later blow up is always cool. Maybe it's partially sort of helped by the kind of broadening fame of Stephen King and people's wanting to see.
And it's like the 50-year anniversary.
Right.
I neglected to say that because it stole the thunder a little bit. It's probably like a pretty significant reason why everybody's doing it. It's like, 2024 was the 50-year anniversary of Carrie the Musical, or the novel rather. So,
Yeah, for sure. A good way to celebrate. Go and see the musical for sure. I'll just give us just a quick summary to jump us into the conversation of the plot. The plot follows the sort of like big events of the plot of Carrie, right? So Carrie is a young 16-year-old a girl in school who is just mercilessly bullied as a baseline of the play. And she kind of is made fun of for a lot of reasons, including her sort of seclusion from the group, her she being raised by a pretty conservative single mom who kind of instills a bunch of religious beliefs into her. And then early on in the play, she experiences a pretty publicly embarrassing moment where she has her first period in like the group showers, and she's sort of mercilessly teased for that moment by the group of friends. The sort of notable difference in this play is that the kind of lens through which we're viewing it is Sue, who is one of the students who teases her, who bullies her. The start of the play starts with her at this like tribunal being interviewed about the events that happened at the school for the prom, and so we kind of get this opening image of Sue, and then kind of track her throughout the play as well. We also meet Chris, who is kind of the main on-point bully, who she and Sue were kind of childhood friends, but she sort of more directly is teasing Carrie and kind of heading up the group that is teasing Carrie. And then also her boyfriend Billy is kind of the rock and roll singer in the group. He's her kind of ne'er-do-well boyfriend. And then there's Tommy, who's Sue's boyfriend, who's kind of a little bit more of the sweet, endearing side. He's the sort of poet of the group. He has a group of friends around him as well, and they all kind of have a number of songs of introduction to themselves and their own little journeys that they're on. However, Carrie still winds up being sort of the main plot line of this play. It's not really as much just the plot line of Sue and her interacting with telling the story from the past. We instead follow Carrie quite a bit. So we follow Carrie home after this moment of bullying. She goes home to her mom, and they sing a number about this struggle of this fundamentalist Christian worldview, right? Of her mom trying to instill this Eve was weak sort of theology into her, and basically doesn't apologize for not having kind of prepared Carrie for this moment in her life that was coming, or teaching her anything about this moment of trying to prepare her for that. And it winds up shutting her in a closet, basically, almost as like a punishment, and sort of like throwing sort of really conservative, rough theology at her around that. All this sort of like cues the friend group to continue talking about this event, right? This group of teenagers all talking about this event. Chris continues to bring it up, and Sue starts to feel sort of bad about the fact that she's bullied Carrie so mercilessly. And with prom looming on the horizon, she comes up with this idea to try to make up for it. She goes to Carrie, tries to apologize to her. Carrie doesn't really receive it because she assumes that it's part of a joke or further teasing. And so Sue hatches this plan to get Tommy, again, her boyfriend, who is going to ask her to the prom, to ask Carrie out to the prom instead. And she kind of talks Tommy into it, despite his sort of being resistant to it. But he eventually agrees to go along with it. All the while, there's two professors who are kind of floating through the plot as well. There's Miss Gardner, who's kind of become sort of a protective entity for Carrie, kind of noticing that the girls are teasing her pretty mercilessly and is trying to protect her as best she can. So when she gets wind of this, she assumes that both Tommy and Sue are kind of like leading into a further bullying, perhaps, and she basically threatens them that if they're going to hurt Carrie as a result of Tommy taking her to the prom, that she's going to, have some punishment in store for them in a teacherly way. Tommy eventually does go and offer to take Carrie to the prom, and Carrie, after saying no a couple times, sort of out of nervousness, but also fear of her telling her mother that she's going to go to the prom, eventually says yes. And says that she's going to go. Now, in preparation for telling her mom, she has started to sort of awaken to this psychic talent that she has, this sort of telekinesis, this sort of acts out occasionally. It acts out in the shower scene where, like, at the height of her sort of embarrassment and anger at this merciless teasing, she like shatters a light bulb. There's a couple other scenes where we're kind of cued that this telekinesis moment is happening. At one point, a Jesus figurine floats in front of her and she sort of controls when it falls, etc. And so
she flips somebody off their skateboard at one point.
Mm-hmm.
There's one scene where she's in the library reading about telekinesis, and she is able to, at that moment, consciously control like chairs and such like that. So she's been growing this, whatever the ability is, throughout the first part of the musical.
Which culminates in this end of Act One with this song with her mom, where her mom continues to try to sing this sort of like, we must be careful, we must be separate from the world sort of theology towards her, while she says, I'm going to do this, I really want to try this, maybe Tommy is different, this could be okay, I don't want you to keep pushing this on me, I want to figure out a way to be my own person for a little bit. And this culminates in her using her telekinetic ability to like slam all the windows closed in the middle of the storm, and her saying, I'm not scared of you anymore. You don't have any power over me. I have more power than you. I'm going to go to this prom on my own power if I must, even if you can't support me to do it. That's the climax of Act One. Second act is kind of a rollout of the rest of that plot, right? Everyone's preparing for prom. Everyone's trying to get ready to go. And all along the way, Chris is like sort of getting undermined, both by the professors, both by Sue not really wanting to go along with her continued teasing of Carrie. And so Chris hatches this pretty famous plot line of her and Billy kind of getting this bucket of pig's blood and dropping it onto Carrie in the middle of the prom. And they engineer this whole sort of way that she'll win the prom queen to be on stage to have this dropped on her at the prom.
So in the 1988 sort of flop version of the musical, supposedly one of the things that was, made it such a notable not success is that the pig's blood, when Chris and Billy are getting it set up, they apparently used to do this whole song and dance thing about killing the pig. Which
sure.
It seems like in this version has been boiled down to like a short verse.
Yep. Amidst a larger song. Yep.
That seems like a good choice.
Yeah, that seems like a good choice.
I like bold decisions, so I don't know that at face value I'm opposed to the pig killing song necessarily. Right. But it does seem like the safer choice to remove that, I would say.
For sure. Yep. Worth the rewrite there. So the prom eventually goes off. Carrie is able to sort of go to the prom with Tommy. There's this lovely kind of start to the prom where it seems like it's all, sort of like maybe on the upswing, etc. Sue, though, starts to notice the sort of plot that has been hatched by Chris and Billy right before it happens. So she runs to Miss Gardner, tries to stop things. Mrs. Gardner still thinks that she's sort of hatching a part of this plot to tease Carrie, so she ends up shoving her outside of the school and locking the doors against her, which is fortuitous for Sue, because what ensues is this plot to embarrass Carrie gets pulled off. The pig's blood is dropped on her, and she has this sort of telekinetic mind break or reaction to that, where she goes Super Saiyan on everyone there, and kind of just regardless of how much or how little a character has tried to help or has been kind or has been just straight up mean or in some cases really, really awful to her, she kills the whole school. Kills and somewhat differently from the book, where there's like a sprinkler system and electrical fire and it's sort of maybe accidental, etc. She like squishes a bunch of people against the wall with telekinetic ability and then kind of sets an explosion to the school and blows it up.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, it's a little odd to read, of course, and I've watched some videos and looked at production photos, but it there's not a ton of like the moment isn't a big song and dance number or anything like that. There's music for it, but it's not very textually rendered. It's really just a stage direction about what happens, which is all fine and good, but it means that the production that you see, like, there's going to be a pretty wide variety of executions of what that moment is. And in fact, in the foreword to the script, they describe many different options. And of course, we talked about, like, it used to be tried to execute through special effects, and that's part of a problem with the initial production. So they even recommend more theatrical, stylized sorts of ways. My understanding is a lot of productions execute it through like dance choreography.
Yeah.
But still, like, for such a major moment in the story, and you're describing like how the musical may stage that story differently than the novel, I'm not sure if the script for the story or the script for the musical has a particular story of the moment. You know what I mean? It would be pretty different.
Certain that it'd be interesting to sort of look at the song just prior to that and sort of suss out a little bit of it, but the actual moment of the act of destroying the whole school and sort of telekinetically throwing everyone around the room is this sort of like perhaps underscored moment, and I think that leads well into dance. But is this sort of like stage direction moment?
I just to give you a set, I won't read the whole chunk here, but all it really says is Carrie extends her arms like the wings of an avenging angel and exacts her terrible revenge on friend and enemy alike, dispatching and then a bunch of names. Confused and disoriented, her victims scream in terror. They're hurled and levitated in the air. Destruction complete, Carrie flexes open the gym's doors and exits, doors slamming behind her. And then an explosion shakes the gym. And again, I'm just to be clear, I'm not quoting directly. I'm just taking little bits and pieces from around it. But you get a sense for like, that is, well, it's a description of just the most basic events. It's not really a description of the little actions that build it up, or really how to, like on stage, how do you make something like that happen? And how you do it is going to really change. I mean, it's the end of the musical. It's going to really change what the experience is.
Yeah, and what you think about like what degree of psychic break versus like seizing power Carrie goes through at the end of this relentless teasing that the school has been engaging in. Just to wrap up the summary, just so we can jump into the full conversation, Carrie goes home, similar to the main plot, and sort of leaves a swath of destruction behind her. She goes home to her mother Margaret and sort of like seeks comfort and safety with her mother. However, her mother has been like prepared with a knife to kill, like in quotes, kill the witch daughter that she has, and like stabs her with a knife. Carrie ends up like stopping her heart with telekinesis, and ends up killing her mom. And all along the way, Sue has sort of like followed her to the house, and so Sue is there for this kind of final moment, and she sort of like somewhat tenderly connects with her as Carrie slips away as a result of the knife wound as well. And that's sort of like pretty much the end point of the play is this sort of song where everyone comes back on and sort of sings about the complication of this interaction that they had with Carrie, and the degree to which all of these kids really are trying to negotiate how to live within this life that they had, and like trying to negotiate with each other their interactions, but also trying to actually see each other, and certainly within the course of this plot see Carrie and try to figure out a way, or to voice at least now beyond death for most of them, how they could have maybe done it differently.
Right. So there's a lot of musicals are adaptations of other things, especially commercial musicals. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that there's a lot of money in musicals. They're still far and away, other than the Christmas Carol, they're still the most common type of theater that people go out to see are musicals. And so there's a huge financial backing in terms of like doing things on Broadway and tours and such, but even for like your local community theater, you probably do a big musical because it fills the seats, right? Or your college or wherever. And so because there's money wrapped up in musicals, they tend to be more often based on tried and true stories that are recognizable, titles that are going to be recognizable. And they tend to be like a little more formulaic often. So Carrie here is there's a great example of that, because musicals we've talked about on the podcast before, they tend to have like what we call an I want song very early in the musical, typically the second, but somewhere early, where the protagonist will sing whatever the core desire or goal or objective is for the musical. It's not something that you really see as much in other types of storytelling, but in like the American musical proper, you have this moment. And Carrie is a great, they have that pure out. They have this first song where all the high schoolers sing about, how hard it is to be a high schooler, the pressures of being seen and noticed and wanting to be part of the in crowd, how important that is to sort of your emotional well-being as a high schooler. Very much the kind of song that nowadays opens like this whole genre of, Heathers, of Mean Girls, of Be More Chill, of all the musicals that are coming out, that are part of this. So they have that song. And then the second song, Carrie sings. Here's a quote, right? She says, "Finally, I'd hear that word sounding so sweet, thousands of voices forever repeating, Carrie, Carrie, Carrie." The I Want song is about how everybody calls her, all these terrible bullying nicknames, and they won't say her actual name. And she wants to have a vision someday of how people will say her real name and how they'll know her. And of course, that ends up happening. Now, not quite for the reasons that she is imagining in the I Want song, I would guess. But that's just a good example of how like musical structure is layered onto other types of media because it is reliable. Now, that doesn't mean it always works out. Carrie, of course, is a notorious financial flop. But it is very common.
Yeah, and I think if you kind of look at that as the way this structure is functioning, the Sue and Carrie dynamic is that journey. Sue has a number of songs where she kind of notices that she has not been noticing Carrie, and the kind of slow wake up that she has of like, oh, how many times have I walked? I think one of the songs has a lyric essentially along the lines of how many times have I walked by someone and not really seen them, not really been awake to them as I've sort of walked by them. So that journey of being seen and known is the journey that Carrie and Sue go on, to the point that Sue is there at the end. It's also the journey that Carrie sort of gets to go on towards other characters as well. I'm thinking especially of like Tommy and his like sort of poem subplot in this one. They kind of have this subplot of like Tommy being a poet and he writes poetry, etc. And Carrie, one of Carrie's big like I'm realizing that I'm going to be okay in the world songs is sung with Tommy about his poem. And so she both out of a desire to be seen and known, she sees Tommy and sees what he has to offer as well. So I think that there's multiple of the like sort of plots and subplots of this are around this negotiation of when a character is seen or not.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's really interesting too because a thing that you can really get away with in musicals that's hard to get away with in, for example, like Kate Hamill's just straight stage adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, is that in musicals, it is very common for a character to just look at the audience and tell you what they're thinking. This is an internal monologue song is kind of, there's like three big musical buckets. There's dialogic songs, the characters sing in conversation. There's like actual performance songs where the characters know they're performing a song. And then there's like internal monologue songs where what they're singing is not anything the character is literally saying out loud in the story, but it's whatever's going on inside their head. The great advantage to that in adapting a book is that books are full of the thoughts of the characters. That an author can open up the mind of any character they choose, depending on how they're writing the story and what the rules for how they talk to the audience are, and show you what that character is thinking. And there's just not, outside of like the Shakespeare soliloquy and the musical internal monologue, drama doesn't have a formula for that. It really has to externalize internal thoughts into action in order to be seen. And musicals have this, instilled in them. And so we get in this adaptation of Carrie quite a bit of the character's thoughts and feelings about seeing and being seen throughout the musical in a way that's not externalized necessarily. It's not necessarily translated into action. It's just translated into language and music.
Yeah. Yep. The way that musicals have the ability to make sense of just saying your interior monologue, saying them to a good melody, is probably is unmatched, almost, other than perhaps the soliloquy. And so like the ability, there's less there's less ambiguity in terms of what the characters' motives are, especially in this musical. Around we get Chris's world, right? The song Chris's World, where we like actually get into the head of Chris a little bit and like hear a little bit about like the moral code that she's working with to be this sort of a bully in the world. Now there's all sorts of maybe questions about how that got instilled with her. She mentions some like complication with parents in there too. So there's all sorts of wondering around that, but like we get so much more into the reasons why than say in John Proctor's The Villain, where we're just trying to like engage all of these characters talking to each other and sort of making our own subjective interpretation of what their motives are.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that you have like the quality of the music is a storytelling choice too, right?
Yeah.
So when Tommy performs his poem, for example, so Tommy is an athlete. We don't really get a ton of his sports side, other than Sue tells us, because again, Tommy is Sue's boyfriend. Sue tells us like that Tommy was this great athlete, and they talk a little bit about how the plan for their life was to go on, pursue athletics. But in this like English class, kind of right in the middle of the musical, Tommy is one of the few people apparently who's actually doing the English assignments, and the teacher asks him to get up and read his poem. Well, like, how are we, the audience, supposed to engage with the quality of this poem? The class, of course, ridicules him to no end for the poem that he writes, and that's certainly the world that the musical is telling us, where that kind of public vulnerability is going to be met with out and out mocking. But like, what are we supposed to make of it? In a straight play, it would be almost entirely rooted in like our ability to judge what the actor is doing with the lines. Like, what is the subverbal, the nonverbal cues, the gesture, the facial expressions, all of those ways that we communicate that aren't just the words. And we would judge other people's reactions of what's going on. But when you add a musical, suddenly you get a quality, this other thing that's going on. It happens in film, right, with film scoring, but stage plays are not scored in the same way that films are typically, except musicals. So he gets up and he sings, and the quality of the poem is made beautiful by the music that's rendered to sing along with it, by the melody, by the care and the sort of ballad nature, the hopeful sense of the music. And so you have, when you adapt a prose into a musical, the one thing that the composers have to do is figure out what is the story of the moment, and how does that story work musically?
Yeah, and a lot of times you see that sort of done with style of music, as you've sort of already said, stylistically, what sort of the mood of the music is, whether it's, rock and roll, or sort of like Billy, for instance, is a character in this play that comes on with a rock anthem often, and it's certainly like evoking his sort of like edgy nature, right? He rolls in on a skateboard singing rock music, kind of archetypal. I think the script uses like iconic characters, but it certainly deploys that. And this script also like goes that extra bridge further of like recommending tone for pretty much each of the characters, leaning into this sort of more like, these are iconic characters that have a particular thing we're going for with each of them. So for instance, Tommy has his voice should have an effortless pop quality, or Chris has her voice is pop rock, percussive, and powerful in her character notes. So it goes that extra bridge of like, these are specifically the things that we're going for with the musicality of these characters and what we're trying to evoke.
Right, and well, I've read many Stephen King stuff, and I love his prose. The way that he writes, I think, is really engaging. But again, when you do a stage adaptation of a novel, you take away all of that, all the stuff the author is able to speak directly to the audience, and all you're left with when you stage something is the actions. What do the characters do and say, and how do you tell a story built on that? That's what you boil drama down to. Except with musicals, where you get like this other thing, the notes of the song that somehow like get at like what the author tells the audience in reading that scene, I assume from Carrie, where Tommy shares his poem in class. Somehow the music tries to do a little of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and not just the notes of the song, but also the way that the characters sing like duets together. I think one of the strongest set of dyads in this play is Carrie and her mom Margaret have a song where Margaret is trying to just like copy paste her worldview into Carrie, and Carrie is trying to negotiate how to either do that and resonate with it, or eventually to buck it in the kind of climactic song at the end of the act. That's paired with a song between Carrie and Miss Gardner, where Miss Gardner is kind of singing this song that's trying to broaden her world a little bit and be like, maybe this prom will be awesome for you. Maybe you'll have a moment where you see like the guy across the room and get welcomed into the dance together. And she sings this song, and then Miss Gardner and Carrie sing a line at a time, repeating each other back to each other. And so the way that the lyrics of the songs in both of those overlap, one with Margaret is this kind of like fierce overlapping of like on top of each other the whole time. They're basically singing over each other, as opposed to the scene with Miss Gardner, where Miss Gardner is like singing the whole thing and then singing a line at a time, and Carrie sings it back to her. I love that. That's really good juxtaposition of two parenting styles. And you get to see it work its way out in Carrie and what she can engage with.
And it's obviously like totally, you were right, I think, where we started. It's a totally different language than prose writing is. And that we talked some in our Pride and Prejudice episode about like, there's a way of thinking about adaptions that is just trying to do the same thing across mediums. So
Right.
that if you go and see Pride and Prejudice the play and you read Pride and Prejudice the novel, it's like the same memory that you have of them. And so there are people that really don't like Kate Hamill's adaptation style because it's not in any way what you would consider a pure adaptation of the thing across genres. What I don't really understand is that musicals escape that criticism, despite the fact that like what you're describing is an absolute and complete change to the original. Like I would argue that any musical adaptation is farther away from the novel than like a play adaptation would be, almost no matter how much you change it or theatricalize it. But we accept the non-reality of musicals as a given of the form.
Right.
And so that is what makes like a musical like Carrie, where non-reality, right? It's a story about a girl who has telekinetic powers. We don't really know how she got them. We don't really know what the rules of them are. Like many seasons ago, we did Magic Month, right?
Right.
And we talked about the difference between magic systems. And some magic systems are built on a very explicit set of rules. Here's how it works, and the audience follows the story based on how the rules are manipulated by the characters. And then you sometimes see magic where it's like, I don't know, magic. It just happens.
Right.
And the story is then decidedly about something else, because there really is no story in the magic itself, because there's no rules to follow to build a story. Carrie is very much the latter part, right? Like, what are the limits of her telekinetic ability and how does it work? No idea.
No idea.
None.
Yep.
None. But that tells you something, right? It tells you like right away, not the point.
Right.
Right? Not the point. So there is this. So Carrie the novel has this not the point, non-realistic element. And I think that musicals have this like weirdly, and this maybe is kind of a controversial thing to say, not the point element, which is like, this is not like you're not going to walk away from experiencing Carrie the musical and be like, the music, man. The music. And sometimes
Right,
you
sure.
are, right? Like the music of Phantom of the Opera, big part of the point. Not so much here. And I think that's an interesting alignment of form and content. Like the music is part of it, but it's just part of telling the story that this world is like not exactly the same as our world for some reason.
Yeah.
There's this other non-realistic thing that we're just asking you to accept.
Yeah, yeah. I think This play has a little bit of an extra hurdle with that as well. This like sort of like accept and go along with it, because it is trying to engage this plot pretty seriously, right? It's trying to, it has, there's a show note at the beginning from the authors of saying in the tone that they were never interested in seeing their show. I'll just read what they said. We were never interested in seeing our show done in a campy or kitschy style. We've been offered that opportunity. I've never chosen to go down that road. Treating the material seriously, however, doesn't mean that it should be performed without humor, excitement, or fun. On the contrary, it absolutely needs those elements. And so you have this like trying to hold the seriousness, trying to hold the funniness occasionally, all with the sort of like this absurd element of musicals, which is like, we sing about our feelings in a public manner, and tell about our kind of interior feelings to you, the audience, in a really direct way through song. So it's got this like this almost like, you know, brush with absurdism to try to jump into a dramatic plot with these given circumstances of musicals in the mix.
Yeah, and it is an experience of feeling that there is a story happening that's happening in the acting and the lines between the characters that is not necessarily like, I don't know what you're supposed to find in that story necessarily, other than just like the forward progression of plot elements, except that we know that there is a scene coming that we are going towards.
Yeah.
And like that is largely the structuring element of this is, and whether or not you know, like if you walk into Carrie and you don't know the story at all and you don't know anything about it, you still, I think, would get a very clear sense that something is going to happen at prom. I would think from very early in the musical, there is going to be a confrontation between Chris and Carrie and the various groups that they fall in with. And it's probably going to happen at the prom. Now, the thing about adapting a story like this that has such this iconic moment of the pig's blood is a lot of the experience becomes about how that's going to happen. Waiting for that moment to come and how is it going to be done, because I know it's coming, and even if I don't know the story, I can sense that there is something terrible going to happen, and what is that going to be and when. And it's very interesting to me that this musical doesn't locate that inside of like a textual song. There are not like lyrics to sing at that moment.
Yeah, there's the kind of dramatic moment before, right, where the pig's blood actually falls, and then this sort of heartbreaking song from Carrie where she sort of like does take on her mother's theology a little bit, and says it's true what she said, that the world is going to be like this, and then there is the action of destruction after it. And both, yeah, it is sort of interesting that both of those moments are sort of called for theatricality, theater magic, and imaginative space. Sort of both of those sort of like high stakes actions are just underscored. They're not sung to in any particular way.
Well, and because the novels, like the story, I guess, more than the novels, sense of the magic or the superpower is this non-realistic, unspecified thing, and that is carried over in the musical, and that is sort of the relationship with the music in general of this piece. It maybe is a way of understanding like why the original version of this, where there was a heavy lean into special effects to achieve it, it just didn't meet what the musical itself was doing, which was asking you to hold the telekinetic part not as the focus of what's going on, that it is rendered non-realistically and evocatively more than specifically and followably. And so like in the forward, they talk about like maybe you do the pig's blood with curtains, like, or big red fabric or dance or something like that. And that does, like, to me, and having not seen it, all I've seen are clips and photos. Like that does to me feel more like Carrie the musical than does watching that scene from the film, for example, which is rendered much more realistically.
It's been sort of a fascinating play to sort of try to engage because of its musicality, especially in conversation with Adaptation Month. Alas, we are coming down to the sort of end of our time today to talk about it. But the conversation can totally continue. There's so many other interesting sort of connection points, both to the sort of way that plays are born out of stories often, and this one just happens to be born out of like a relatively recent one, and so there's adaptations and things like that that have bearing on the way that the plot comes together. So excited to continue the conversation. If you have seen this play, been in this play, read this play, or just have something interesting to say as a result of having listened to our conversation around it, you can find us on the socials at the username at @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about Carrie the musical with you.
If you enjoyed this conversation or any of our other conversations, we are partway through Adaptation Month. There is more to come. If you've enjoyed that, recommend us to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes conversations about theater, about writing, acting, storytelling, themes, that kind of stuff. Send them our way. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the places you get your podcasts. You can also like the Facebook page, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish, including next Monday when we're back with the last episode of Adaptation Month. Until then, I'm Jacob, here with Jackson. Thanks for joining us for No Script, the podcast.